Law over force. Every time.
No one. Someone with your mentality believes they can pass judgment on me? Officer Harlan bellowed, his composure utterly shattered. He then surged from his seat, violently shoving his own legal counsel aside. "Vance, cease this," the attorney pleaded. But his command held no sway. Haran had already seized a plastic drinking vessel. He closed the distance in mere seconds, his face flushed crimson, his jaw so tightly clenched it appeared agonizing. Water cascaded across Judge Maya Williams' face. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. "You perch up there as if you possess inherent superiority," Haran snarled, advancing closer, his voice thick with incandescent rage. "You lack any comprehension of what transpires out there. You are oblivious to the burdens I shoulder each night." Maya remained motionless. Water streamed down her features, saturating the lapel of her judicial vestments. Her hands rested with unwavering steadiness on the dais. She raised her gaze, her expression serene and resolute. "Step back, Officer Harland," she commanded. He emitted a sharp, derisive chuckle. "Officer, do not address me with that title as if you harbor any respect." "I recall with absolute clarity the reason for your presence here," Maya responded. The courtroom fell into a profound silence once more. "You face charges," she stated softly, her tone meticulously controlled, almost tender, of aggravated assault committed under the guise of authority and civil rights infringements against Mr. Marcus Reed. These pronouncements struck with greater force than any outburst. Haran's countenance contorted. "You presume to utter such accusations as if they signify nothing?" he snapped. "You believe you have the right to define what transpired? This tribunal dictates the narrative?" Maya countered evenly. "Based on corroborating evidence, not through coercion." "That individual was mouthing off," Haran barked. Maya's gaze remained unwavering. "Then the evidence will substantiate it." "You refuse to believe me. I place my faith in official documentation, witness accounts, and demonstrable facts." "That was the absolute limit," Haran roared. He propelled himself forward, grasping the edge of the bench, hoisting himself just enough. His hand shot out, fingers balled into a tight fist against the front of her robe, and he yanked with all his might. The sharp sound of rending fabric ripped through the chamber. The dark ceremonial robe tore open from top to bottom. The emblem of official power rent asunder in his grasp. Gasps erupted from the assembly. A scream pierced the air. The court stenographer recoiled from her equipment, her eyes wide with sheer horror. But Harlan did not halt. Fueled by an unbridled fury, he seized her once more. This time, his grip encompassed not just her attire, but her arm, dragging her forward with brutal force. "Get up!" he bellowed. The judge's bench was no longer a protective barrier. He pulled her from behind it, forcing her into the open space adjacent to the counsel table. The bailiff shouted and rushed forward, but he was a fraction of a second too late. "Harlan, release me!" Maya implored, her voice still low, still remarkably composed. "You do not issue directives to me," he growled. "This is your final admonition," he declared, then swung. His fist connected with Maya's face with a dull, sickening thud. Her head snapped violently to the side, and her equilibrium was instantly compromised. She collapsed heavily, her shoulder and flank impacting the sharp corner of the wooden table before she slumped to the floor. A collective cry of dismay tore through the courtroom. The sound of the collision reverberated against the lofty ceiling, then dissolved into utter pandemonium. For an infinitesimal moment, time itself seemed to cease. Harlan stood over her, his breathing heavy, his chest heaving rhythmically, his fist still clenched. "You are not permitted to pass judgment on me," he grunted, his voice low, quivering with something far more sinister than mere anger. "You have no right to stand above me on this floor." Maya made no sound of distress. There was pain, sharp and immediate, but she absorbed it in the same manner she had processed all other adversities, silently, deliberately, denying him the satisfaction of witnessing her panic. She pressed her hand briefly against the edge of the table, steadying herself. A faint crimson line marked the corner of her lip. The bailiff reached Harlan, then grasped his arm, forcibly propelling him backward with considerable strength. "Step away," the bailiff commanded. This time Harlan offered resistance, but only momentarily. The surge of adrenaline was dissipating. The atmosphere in the room had irrevocably transformed. He surveyed his surroundings, and the emotion he perceived was no longer shock. It was something considerably colder. The gallery members stared at him, no longer with surprise, but with stark clarity. His attorney stood frozen, pale and utterly defeated. For the first time, Harlan found himself completely devoid of control. On the floor, Maya drew a measured breath. "Bailiff," she stated. "Apprehend him." "Yes, Your Honor," the bailiff confirmed, tightening his grip. Maya pushed herself upright, not with haste, nor with any dramatic flourish, but with steadfast determination. The torn robe hung askew from her shoulders. The damage was evident, the injury undeniable, yet her posture remained unbent. Her eyes once again met his, and in that precise instant, the entire courtroom sensed it. Not animosity, not a thirst for retribution, but an undeniable aura of authority. "You have just validated my point," she remarked quietly. Harlan blinked, a flicker of something uncertain and foreign appearing behind his anger. The bailiff pulled him further away now. Maya adjusted the remnants of her robe with calm precision, disregarding the tear, the blood, and the surrounding disarray. "Let the official record indicate," she declared, her voice unwavering and clear, "that the defendant has escalated from verbal insubordination to physical assault upon this court." The room fell silent, but it was a silence fundamentally different from before. This quietude possessed gravitas. It was witnessed. It carried repercussions. Maya looked directly at Harlan. "You desired this court to witness your true character," she stated. "Now it has." His breathing grew more pronounced. She turned slightly towards the clerk. "This court will not succumb to intimidation. We shall resume proceedings once order has been re-established," she announced. No raised voice was necessary, nor was any retaliatory action taken. Only the immutable presence of the law permeated the room, calm and unyielding, while every vestige of power Vance Harlan had presumed to wield within those walls began to disintegrate under the weight of his actions. The bailiff maintained a firm grip on both of Vance Harlan's arms, but every individual present in courtroom 3B understood that this restraint was merely temporary. Harlan remained standing, his breathing still ragged, his gaze fixed upon Judge Maya Williams, as if the very room had conspired against him. The jagged edge of Maya's robe hung open at the front, and a thin trace of blood persisted at the corner of her mouth. Yet her voice did not falter as she spoke again. "Mr. Harlan will return to his designated seat," she directed. "He will remain silent unless specifically addressed by the court." "You cannot simply feign ignorance of these events," Harlan retorted. "I am not feigning anything," Maya replied. "I am ensuring it is officially documented." His legal representative, Thomas Greer, finally found his voice. "Your Honor, I formally request an immediate recess." Maya regarded him. Greer appeared pallid, one hand still pressed against his ribs, a consequence of the shove inflicted by his own client. This man had cultivated a career defending law enforcement officers accused of professional misconduct. Yet at this juncture, he resembled less an advocate and more a witness whose case had imploded before the opening statements had even concluded. "Request acknowledged," Maya stated. "Denied for the present." Greer swallowed. "Your Honor, my client is demonstrably agitated." "Your client is accused of acts of violence perpetrated under the color of authority," Maya countered. "His agitation is not novel evidence. It is a direct manifestation of the matter currently before this court." A low murmur spread through the gallery. Harlan's expression darkened. "You are relishing this," he stated. Maya's eyes returned to him. "No, Officer Harlan, I am enduring it." The words landed with quiet force, penetrating deeply. Marcus Reed's mother lowered her gaze, her hand covering her mouth. An elderly black gentleman, seated 2 rows behind her, closed his eyes briefly, as if the statement had resonated with something within him that predated the case itself. Maya turned towards the clerk. "Call the case." The clerk hesitated, then cleared her throat. "The State of Illinois versus Vance Harlan. Case number 2, 3C4187. The charges encompass aggravated assault under color of authority, civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and obstruction." Harlan emitted a cynical laugh. Evidence tampering now as well. Maya did not avert her gaze from the clerk. One further interruption, Mr. Harlan, and I shall have you escorted from the premises. You have already orchestrated an assault upon me. The bailiff prevented further aggression. I barely touched you. This time, Maya looked down at him, and the courtroom seemed to constrict around her silent resolve. You forcibly removed a sitting judge from the bench, tore her ceremonial robe, and struck her in an open courtroom. She stated, "If that constitutes your interpretation of barely, then this court possesses an unclouded perspective of the peril you represent." For the initial occasion, Harlan lacked an immediate retort. He sat down slowly, not out of deference to her authority, but because every eye in the room had shifted to regard him with disapproval. He could feel it. Reporters were scribbling notes. The court reporter's fingers had returned to her keyboard. The surveillance camera positioned in the corner above the gallery stared down, unblinking. That camera had borne witness to everything. Harlan glanced upward at it, and for a fleeting moment, a subtle shift registered on his face. Not remorse, but calculation. Maya perceived it. She had spent sufficient years within the confines of courtrooms, and a considerable time prior to that in uniform, to recognize the precise instant a violent individual transitioned from overt action to clandestine strategizing. It was never the vocalizations that caused her the greatest concern. It was the profound silence that followed. "Bailiff," she instructed, "please inform courthouse security that the defendant is to be kept under close observation during any movement from this chamber." "Affirmative, Your Honor." Greer leaned towards his client and whispered, "Do not utter another word. Do you comprehend me?" "Not a single one." Harlan stared straight ahead. Maya redirected her attention to Assistant District Attorney Daniel Brooks. "Mr. Brooks, the prosecution may commence with its preliminary statement." Brooks stood. He was approximately in his early 40s, meticulously presented, measured in his demeanor, the type of prosecutor who eschewed unnecessary emotion when factual evidence would suffice. Nevertheless, even he paused for a moment before speaking. All present had witnessed a boundary being transgressed, and the atmosphere in the room was still struggling to regain its equilibrium. "Your Honor," Brooks began, "the prosecution intends to demonstrate that Officer Vance Harland did not act out of fear, confusion, or in self-defense on the night Marcus Reed sustained his injuries. He acted with premeditation, he acted with prejudice, and he acted under the assumption that his badge would shield him from accountability." Harlan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Brooks stepped slightly away from the counsel table. Marcus Reed was 22 years of age, a graduating senior in the engineering program at Midwestern State University. He was en route to his residence from his part-time employment at a wholesale food distribution center when Officer Harland initiated a traffic stop, citing a malfunctioning taillight. Mr. Reed cooperated fully. He pulled his vehicle over to the roadside. He kept his hands clearly visible. He inquired as to the reason for the stop. In the gallery, Marcus's mother clutched her handbag once more. Brooks continued. Within minutes, Mr. Reed was lying on the asphalt with a fractured cheekbone, 2 broken ribs, and a shoulder injury necessitating surgical intervention. Officer Harland asserted that Mr. Reed resisted. He claimed Mr. Reed attempted to reach for his waistband. He maintained that the use of force was justified. He paused. "The evidence will unequivocally reveal otherwise." Harlan looked down at the table. His fingers coiled into fists. Maya listened with an impassive countenance, but the details settled heavily within the room. The humming fluorescent lights, the polished hardwood flooring, the faint aroma of coffee emanating from someone's travel mug. Ordinary American elements surrounding a stark and unpleasant American reality. Brooks lifted a file. "The prosecution will present witness testimonies, comprehensive medical records, dispatch logs, body camera footage, and internal investigative reports that were initially classified as incomplete. Furthermore, we will establish that this was not an isolated instance of misunderstanding. It was, in fact, part of a discernible pattern." Greer abruptly rose. "Objection, argumentative and prejudicial." "Sustained in part." Maya stated, "Mr. Brooks, please confine your opening remarks to the evidence you anticipate proving." "Yes, Your Honor." Brooks nodded. "The evidence will demonstrate that Officer Harlan's actions towards Marcus Reed were deliberate, unlawful, and motivated by discriminatory bias." The term bias rippled through the room like a frigid draft seeping under a door. Harlan leaned towards Greer and whispered, "He is fabricating." Greer hissed back, "Maintain your silence." Maya's gaze shifted towards the defense table, and Harlan became motionless. Brooks concluded concisely, "At the conclusion of these proceedings, the prosecution will formally request that Officer Vance Harland be held accountable under the very statutes he swore to uphold." He sat down. Greer stood next. He smoothed his jacket, attempting to regain the dignity his client had so recently stripped from him. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, who may subsequently hear this case, the defense will endeavor to demonstrate that the complex realities of law enforcement are not conducted from the perceived safety of a courtroom. Decisions are made instantaneously under intense pressure within environments where inherent danger does not announce its arrival politely." Maya's expression remained inscrutable. Greer continued, "Officer Harland dedicated 15 years of service to this city. He responded to calls that the majority of citizens would flee from. He entered dimly lit alleys, residences, and scenes of profound violence where any hesitation could result in the loss of lives. On the night in question, he perceived an imminent threat and reacted precisely as he had been trained." Harlan lifted his chin slightly, drawing sustenance from the words, but the prevailing sentiment in the room did not shift back in his favor. Not after the spectacle they had just witnessed. Not after the water, the torn robe, the forceful blow, the blood. Greer was cognizant of this as well. His voice faltered as he neared his conclusion. "This case is not about racial distinctions. It is not about political maneuvering. It is about whether an officer made a decision that was reasonable under the circumstances." In a moment fraught with peril, Maya folded her hands. "This court will determine the true nature and subject of this case. It will be determined in accordance with the evidence presented." Greer resumed his seat. For several seconds, an absolute silence prevailed. The fundamental structure of the trial had now become evident. It was not merely a confrontation between Marcus Reed and Vance Harlan. It was a struggle between recollection and denial, between documented fact and established reputation. It represented the protracted silence of a community against one man's unwavering conviction that such silence would perpetually offer him protection. Maya turned her gaze towards Haran. "You entered this courtroom under the mistaken belief that authority is possessed by whoever can instill the greatest degree of fear in the most individuals. That is not how this chamber operates." Haran's eyes burned with intensity, but he offered no verbal response. She continued, "Within these walls, authority is vested in the law, not in the voice that shouts the loudest, not in the arm that wields the greatest physical strength, and certainly not in the insignia of a badge." Several individuals in the gallery straightened their postures. Marcus Reed's mother discreetly wiped away a single tear. "If you feel the profound significance of what Judge Maya Williams has just articulated, please signify your agreement by selecting the like button, in solidarity with every individual who has ever quietly stood against oppressive intimidation. And before we proceed further, kindly share in the comments section your location, your city, your state, your country, as you are watching this narrative unfold. It is possible that someone in your immediate vicinity might be witnessing this same unfolding story at this very moment. Kindly subscribe to this channel and activate the notification bell so that you do not miss the subsequent powerful account when justice ultimately begins to assert itself." Maya turned to the bailiff. "Bring forth the initial witness." The double doors swung open. Officer Ryan Kessler stepped across the threshold. His face appeared drawn, his uniform impeccably pressed, as if a rigid adherence to protocol might somehow preserve his composure. He averted his gaze from Harlan as he walked towards the witness stand. Harlan watched him with an initial expression of disbelief, which swiftly transmuted into visceral hatred. For in that precise instant, he comprehended the nature of the second chapter in his impending downfall. The silence was about to be irrevocably broken. Officer Ryan Kessler took the oath, his right hand raised, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the clerk's shoulder. He possessed an age that suggested his uniform still appeared freshly earned, yet he was old enough to fully grasp the gravity of occupying that witness chair and testifying against a fellow officer. His countenance bore the muted exhaustion of a man who had endured weeks of restless nights. Judge Maya Williams observed him with keen attention. The torn front of her robe had been discreetly pinned together by the clerk during a brief intermission, and although the contusion along her cheek had begun to deepen in color, she remained seated erect, her voice steady as she addressed the witness. "Officer Kessler," she stated, "you are under oath. Respond to each question with absolute clarity. If you do not fully comprehend a question, please indicate so." "Yes, Your Honor," Kessler replied. At the defense table, Vance Harland reclined slowly, his eyes locked onto the witness with a hatred so intense it appeared almost tangible. His attorney, Thomas Greer, placed a cautionary hand near his sleeve, refraining from actual contact. Assistant District Attorney Daniel Brooks approached the podium. "Officer Kessler, how long have you been a member of this department?" 3 years. "And on the evening of Marcus Reed's apprehension, were you assigned as Officer Harland's partner?" "Yes, sir." Brooks nodded once. "Please recount for the court your location when the traffic stop commenced." Kessler swallowed. "We were traveling in Patrol Unit 214, proceeding eastward on Benton Avenue. The time was approximately 10:40 p.m. Officer Harland observed a blue Honda Civic exhibiting a damaged taillight. Was the vehicle exceeding the speed limit?" "No." "Was it deviating from its course?" "No, sir." "Did the driver attempt to evade apprehension?" "No." Brooks allowed the responses to fully register before continuing. "What transpired when the vehicle pulled over?" Kessler's gaze briefly dropped to his hands. Mr. Reed brought his vehicle to a halt at the curb adjacent to a closed hardware establishment. He activated the interior lighting. His hands were clearly visible on the steering wheel. Marcus Reed's mother, seated in the gallery, closed her eyes. The gesture was subtle, yet everyone in her vicinity took note. Brooks inquired, "Did Marcus Reed comply with the instructions given?" "Initially, yes." Initially, Kessler shifted. He asked why he was being stopped. He sounded apprehensive, but he was not exhibiting aggression. Harland scoffed audibly under his breath. Maya's eyes immediately shifted towards him. "Mr. Harland," he looked up. "Do not test the forbearance of this court," she stated. His jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Brooks proceeded. "Officer Kessler, did Mr. Reed pose any threat to either of you?" "No." "Did he possess a weapon?" "No." "Did you witness him reach for a weapon?" Kessler took a longer pause this time. He glanced towards Haran, and for a brief moment, an ingrained sense of loyalty surfaced in his expression, a mere reflex. Then he looked away. "No," he stated, "I did not." The courtroom atmosphere shifted palpably. It was not a matter of noise. It was something far more significant than loudness. It was a collective stillness, the kind that descends when individuals realize a lie has been irrevocably exposed, a door irrevocably closed. Brooks stepped closer. What action did Officer Harland take next? Kessler's voice grew thin and reedy. He commanded Mr. Reed to exit the vehicle. Mr. Reed exited slowly. His hands were raised. He inquired if he could contact his mother. A sound escaped Mrs. Reed. It was neither a sob nor a distinct word. Maya briefly glanced in her direction, then returned her focus to the witness. And then Brooks asked. Kessler's mouth tightened into a grim line. Officer Harland instructed him to be silent. Those precise words, yes. What occurred subsequent to that? Kessler inhaled through his nose. Mr. Reed stated, "I am not doing anything." Officer Harland moved in close and struck him in the ribs with his baton. Greer stood up abruptly. "Objection. This testimony is inflammatory and lacks proper context." Maya responded without hesitation. "Overruled. The witness is describing his direct observations." Greer sat down, his expression clearly strained. Brooks did not expedite his questioning. "Officer Kessler, after the initial impact, what was Marcus Reed's reaction?" "He folded forward. He collapsed against the vehicle." "Did he initiate an attack on Officer Harland?" "No." "Did he strike at him?" "No." "Did he attempt to flee?" "No, sir." Brooks's voice remained even and measured. "What was Officer Harland's subsequent action?" Kessler's hands began to tremble. He clasped them together in an effort to conceal the tremor. He struck him again. Then he forcefully subdued him onto the pavement. "How many times did he strike Mr. Reed?" I recall at least 4 instances. At least. Kessler's face contorted with shame. I ceased counting after Mr. Reed was incapacitated on the ground. The room seemed to draw inward upon itself. Even Harlan's attorney looked down, his gaze fixed on the floor. Brooks allowed a brief silence to pass, then inquired, "Why did you refrain from intervening?" Kessler stared intently at the floor. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of Marcus Reed?" "No." "Afraid of whom?" Kessler did not offer an immediate reply. The question hung in the air, and for the first time Haran leaned forward, his lips barely moving. "Careful," he whispered. Maya heard him. So too did the court reporter. "Mr. Haran," Maya stated, her voice low. "One more attempt to intimidate this witness, and you will be removed from the courtroom and subjected to further contempt proceedings." Harlan's eyes flashed with anger. "I did not say anything." "You did," Maya retorted, "and this court heard you." Several individuals in the gallery shifted their positions. Older faces hardened, registering a sense of recognition. They understood that particular intonation. They understood its implications when power whispered rather than commanded. Brooks returned his attention to Kessler. "Officer Kessler, afraid of whom?" Kessler finally lifted his head. "Officer Harlan." Harlan slammed his palm flat against the table. "You lying coward." The bailiff intervened without delay. Greer seized Harlan's forearm. "Sit down," he whispered. "Sit down before you entrench yourself further." Maya's voice pierced the escalating din. "Enough!" The courtroom fell silent. She gazed at Harlan, her face still bearing the inquiry of his blow. She offered him no gratification. "You will not intimidate a witness within my courtroom." Harlan inhaled deeply, his countenance darkened by rage. Maya turned back to Kessler. "You may proceed." Kessler appeared diminished now, yet also lighter, as if a single dire statement had unlocked a door within him. Brooks inquired, "Why did you fear Officer Harlan?" "Because everyone did," Kessler stated. "He had a history. Complaints vanished. Supervisors protected him. If you crossed him, you ceased receiving assistance on calls. You received unfavorable assignments. You were labeled as weak." Brooks inclined his head. "Did you submit a report that night?" "Yes." "Was it accurate?" Kessler closed his eyes momentarily. "No." "Why not?" "Because Officer Harlan dictated my statement." "What did he instruct you to write?" "That Marcus Reed had resisted, reached for his waistband, and presented a threat." "And was that truthful?" "No." The response was quiet, but it resonated through the room with devastating impact. Marcus Reed's mother lowered her head, her shoulders now trembling. An elderly woman beside her extended her hand in silent solidarity. Brooks posed one final question. "Officer Kessler, why are you speaking the truth now?" Kessler looked toward Maya Williams, not at her frayed robe, not at the bruise, at her eyes. "Because I witnessed him assault a judge in open court," he said, "and I realized Marcus Reed never stood a chance that night." No one moved. Even Harlan seemed momentarily frozen, caught between his fury and the dawning realization of the consequences. Maya allowed the silence to linger, permitting the truth to fully permeate the space. Then she declared, "The witness's testimony will stand." Brooks returned to his table, and Greer slowly rose for cross-examination. But before he could speak, Harlan leaned toward him, his voice barely suppressed. "Destroy him!" Greer glanced at his client, then at Kessler, then at Maya Williams, presiding above them with blood on her lip and the law in her eyes. For the first time that morning, the defense attorney appeared apprehensive, not of the prosecution, but of the man he was representing. Thomas Greer stood behind the defense table, one hand resting on a closed legal pad, though he did not open it immediately. He observed Officer Ryan Kessler in the witness chair, then Judge Maya Williams, and finally Vance Harlan. The courtroom's atmosphere had shifted, pressing against them, and every attorney with sufficient experience recognized when a case ceased to bend and began to shatter. "Officer Kessler," Greer began, forcing his voice into a composure he did not feel. "You testified that you were afraid of my client." "Yes," Kessler confirmed. "You are a trained police officer, correct?" "Yes." "You carry a firearm. You have received training in the use of force, defensive tactics, high-risk stops, and arrest procedures. That is accurate. Greer took a slow step toward the witness stand. Yet, you expect this court to believe that on the night in question, you were too terrified to prevent another officer from performing an act you now claim was unlawful. Kessler swallowed. Yes. Greer exhaled a short, controlled breath, as if disappointed. Convenient. Assistant District Attorney Daniel Brooks stood. Objection. Sustained, Maya stated. Mr. Greer, ask questions. Do not editorialize. Greer nodded curtly. Officer Kessler, you did not report this alleged misconduct that night. Did you? No. You signed a report that supported Officer Harlan's account. Yes. You allowed that report to enter the department's system. Yes. You permitted Marcus Reed to be charged with resisting arrest. Kessler's face tightened. Yes. And only now, after Internal Affairs began its investigation, and after prosecutors offered you protection, have you suddenly discovered your conscience. Brooks stood again. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained, Maya ruled. Greer turned slightly toward the bench. Your Honor, credibility is paramount here, and you may challenge credibility without testifying in place of the witness, Mia replied. A few seasoned attorneys seated in the rear exchanged quiet glances. Mia's tone was not sharp, but it was definitive. Greer had attempted to obscure the truth, and she would not permit it to spread. Greer returned to Kessler. Did the state offer you immunity? No. Did they offer you reduced disciplinary action? No. Did they promise you your job? No. Then what did they offer you? Kessler looked down. Nothing. Greer almost smiled. Nothing. They told me to tell the truth. Harlan snorted. Maya's gaze shifted toward him. Mr. Harlan. He raised both hands slightly, feigning innocence. Maya held his stare for a long moment. You are not assisting yourself. The faint smile vanished from his face. Greer attempted to recover. Officer Kessler, you knew Marcus Reed had prior contact with the police, didn't you? Brooks rose immediately. Objection. Relevance. Greer turned. It pertains to the officer's perception of risk. Maya observed Greer for a moment, then Kessler, then returned her attention to the defense table. Unless you can establish that Officer Kessler or Officer Harlan were aware of that prior contact at the time of the stop, the question is excluded. Greer hesitated. That hesitation answered the question. Move on, Maya instructed. Harlan leaned forward. That's her protecting him. The words were low, but not low enough. Maya did not raise her voice. Mr. Harlan, stand. Greer turned sharply. Your Honor, Mr. Greer, your client will stand. Harlan pushed himself upright, anger blazing across his features. Maya looked down at him from the bench, the torn robe still pinned at her chest, the faint bruise marking her cheek. You have assaulted this court. You have repeatedly interrupted these proceedings. You have attempted to intimidate a sworn witness. I have exercised restraint because this court values due process, even when a defendant does not. Do you understand that restraint is not weakness? Harlan's mouth tightened. Answer the court, Maya commanded. Yes, he muttered. Yes. What? Yes, Your Honor. Sit down. He sat. The room did not exhale until he did. Greer's cross-examination continued for another 20 minutes, but the damage could not be undone. Every attempt to portray Kessler as weak only made Harlan appear more dangerous. Every question about fear reminded the observers of what they had just witnessed firsthand. By the time Greer returned to his table, even he seemed relieved to be finished. Brooks stood for redirect. Officer Kessler, defense counsel asked why you signed a false report. Yes. Do you regret it? Kessler's eyes glinted. Every day. Why? Because Marcus Reed was lying on the ground, and I helped make him appear guilty. Marcus Reed's mother covered her face with both hands. Brooks softened his voice. Did Marcus Reed do anything that justified the force used against him? No. Did he deserve what happened to him? No. Did Officer Harlan tell you what would happen if you contradicted him? Kessler's throat moved. He said, "Nobody likes a partner who forgets who keeps him alive." Harlan stared straight ahead, jaw locked. Brooks nodded. "No further questions." Mia looked at Kessler. "You may step down." Kessler rose slowly as he passed the defense table. Harlan turned just enough for Kessler to see his eyes. No words this time. He did not need them. But Kessler kept walking, and when the courtroom doors opened for him, he stepped through as if leaving a burning building. Maya turned to the clerk. "Call the next witness." The clerk checked the list. "The state calls Dr. Elaine Porter." An older woman in a gray suit rose from the second row. She moved with the composed steadiness of a physician who had spent decades delivering difficult truths to families under fluorescent hospital lights. Her white hair was cut short, her glasses hung from a thin chain, and she carried a folder thick with medical records. She took the oath and sat. Brooks approached. "Dr. Porter, what is your occupation?" "I am an emergency physician at St. Catherine Medical Center. I have practiced emergency medicine for 32 years. Were you working the night Marcus Reed was brought in?" "I was." "Describe his condition." Dr. Porter opened the folder. Mr. Reed had a fractured cheekbone, 2 fractured ribs, a dislocated shoulder, deep bruising along the torso, and signs of blunt force trauma inconsistent with a simple fall or brief struggle. Greer rose. "Objection. Calls for conclusion." Maya looked at the doctor. "Dr. Porter may testify within her medical expertise." Overruled. Brooks continued. "Doctor, did Marcus Reed tell you what happened?" "He said, 'The officer kept hitting me after I was down.'" The statement seemed to pass through the gallery like a cold hand. Dr. Porter removed her glasses. "I have treated men injured in bar fights, car crashes, domestic assaults, and police encounters. Injuries have patterns. Mr. Reed's injuries told a story of repeated impact, after he was no longer in control of his body." Harlan shifted in his chair. Maya noticed. Brooks noticed. The camera noticed. Outside the courthouse, news vans had begun to gather. Inside, the trial moved forward, no longer as a question of whether one officer had made a mistake, but whether an entire chain of silence had allowed him to believe no one would ever stop him. Maya glanced at the clock, then back at the witness. The morning had begun with water in her face, torn cloth in her hands, and blood at her mouth. But by noon, the truth had found its rhythm, and it was marching steadily toward Vance Harlan. Dr. Elaine Porter's testimony did not end with bruises and broken bones. It ended with a photograph. Assistant District Attorney Daniel Brooks placed the enlarged medical image on the evidence screen, and the courtroom fell into the kind of silence that older people recognized immediately. The silence of a family waiting outside an emergency room. The silence of a pastor standing at a graveside. The silence that comes when words are no longer strong enough. Marcus Reed's face filled the screen. One eye swollen nearly shut. A dark purple bruise spread across his cheek. His lower lip split open. Medical tape crossed one shoulder. Even in this still image, there was something painfully young about him, something that made the violence look even more grotesque. He was not a threat in that photograph. He was somebody's son. Mrs. Reed looked down at her lap. Judge Maya Williams watched her from the bench, then looked back at the photograph. Her expression remained composed, but one hand rested lightly on the torn seam of her robe, as if the fabric reminded her that violence always believed it could leave marks and call them victories. Brooks turned to the doctor. "Dr. Porter, in your medical opinion, were these injuries consistent with a single defensive maneuver by a police officer?" "No," Dr. Porter said. "Were they consistent with repeated force?" "Yes. Force after the subject had gone down, in my opinion. Yes." Thomas Greer rose slowly. "Objection. Speculation." Maya looked at Dr. Porter. "Doctor, are you basing that answer on medical training and examination of the patient?" "I am, Your Honor." "Overruled," Maya declared. "The answer will stand." Greer sat, rubbing his forehead. Vance Harlan leaned toward him, whispering harshly, "Do something." Greer did not look at him. "I am." "No, you're sitting there letting them bury me." Greer's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice low. "You buried yourself before the first witness." Harlan stared at him, stunned for 1 second, then furious. Maya's eyes shifted to the defense table. "Counsel, control your client." Greer straightened. "Yes, Your Honor." Brooks moved to the next exhibit. "Dr. Porter, did Mr. Reed say anything else during treatment?" The doctor's face softened just slightly. "Yes. He asked whether his mother had been called." Mrs. Reed made a small sound and pressed a tissue to her mouth. "He asked that more than once," Dr. Porter continued. "He was disoriented, in pain and frightened, but he kept asking for his mother." Brooks paused, allowing the answer to resonate. "Thank you, doctor. No further questions." Greer cross-examined, but he had very little ground beneath him. He asked whether injuries could occur during a struggle. Dr. Porter said they could. He asked whether adrenaline could make a suspect unpredictable. She said it could. He asked whether she had personally witnessed the arrest. She said she had not. But every answer sounded less like a defense and more like a man trying to hang curtains over a house already ablaze. When Dr. Porter stepped down, the clerk called the next witness, Mrs. Angela Reed. The name moved through the room softly. Marcus Reed's mother rose with care, smoothing the front of her navy dress. She was in her early 50s, but worry had aged her in a way years alone could not. Her church gloves were folded neatly in one hand. Her purse stayed tucked under her arm, as if she had carried it through too many hospital corridors and police stations to set it down. Now she took the oath. Her voice was quiet but steady. Brooks approached with caution. "Mrs. Reed, tell the court about your son." Angela Reed drew a breath. "Marcus is my only child. His father passed when Marcus was 14. Heart attack. After that, it was just the two of us." Harlan shifted impatiently. Maya noticed but said nothing. Angela continued. "Marcus worked since he was 16. Grocery store first, then warehouse nights, then campus maintenance. He never liked asking anybody for help. Said if I could work 2 jobs, he could work 1 while going to school." A faint smile touched her mouth and vanished quickly. "He studies engineering, always loved taking things apart. Radios, fans, old lawnmowers from the garage. When he was little, he broke my toaster trying to make it more efficient." A few soft smiles appeared in the gallery, the kind that hurt because they came too close to ordinary life. Brooks asked, "What happened the night of the arrest?" Angela's eyes dropped to her gloves. "I was at home making tea. Chamomile, couldn't sleep. My phone rang close to midnight. It was the hospital. They said my son had been injured during an arrest." Her voice held, but barely. "When I got there, his face..." She stopped. "I did not recognize my own child for a second." The courtroom remained still. "He kept apologizing to me," she said. "That is what I remember most. He was lying there broken. And he kept saying, 'Mama, I'm sorry. I didn't do anything.'" Harlan leaned back, his nostrils flaring. "Performance," he muttered. Maya's head turned. "Harlan," she said quietly. He looked up. "Do not mistake my restraint for permission." For a moment, the old heat rose in him again. Then he looked at the bailiff standing close by and said nothing. Brooks asked, "Mrs. Reed, did Marcus change after that night?" "Yes," she said. "He stopped driving for a while. Wouldn't go out after dark. He wakes up if a car slows down outside the house. He used to talk about building bridges. Now he talks about leaving this city." She looked toward Harlan then, not with hatred, but with something more poignant. "You did not just hurt his body," she said. "You made him feel hunted in his own hometown." Greer rose quickly. "Objection! The witness is addressing my client directly." "Sustained," Maya said gently. Then she looked at Angela. "Mrs. Reed, speak to the court." Angela nodded. "I'm sorry, Your Honor." "No apology needed. Continue, if you can." That small kindness nearly broke her. She blinked several times, gathered herself, and continued. "My son still believes in doing things right. He still says, 'Yes, ma'am,' and 'No, sir.' He still holds doors open for people. But now, when he sees a patrol car,
he goes quiet. And I hate that.
I hate that a badge, something we were raised to respect, became the thing that made my child afraid. Brooks let the words settle. No further questions. Greer stood, but even before he spoke, he knew he was walking into dangerous territory. Cross-examining a grieving mother required delicacy, and delicacy had not survived very long at the defense table. "Mrs. Reed," he began, "you love your son." "Yes." "You want justice for him." "I want the truth, of course." "But your love for him might affect how you view the facts." Angela looked at him steadily. "My love for him is why I paid attention to the facts." Greer paused. Maya's face did not change, but something in the gallery did. Shoulders straightened, eyes lifted. Greer tried again. "You were not present during the traffic stop." "No, sir." "So you cannot personally say whether your son resisted." Angela's voice remained calm. "I can say what my son was like before that night. I can say what he looked like after. And I can say I heard an officer who heard him sit in this courtroom and show us exactly what kind of man he is." Greer closed his mouth. Maya waited, then asked, "Any further questions?" Greer looked at his notes, then said, "No, Your Honor." Angela Reed stepped down slowly. As she passed the gallery, the older woman who had held her hand reached out again, and this time Angela took it. Harlan watched them. Disgust curled across his face. But beneath that disgust, something else had begun to grow. Not fear yet. Fear required imagination. This was closer to pressure, the first understanding that his badge was not in the room with him anymore. Not in the way it had always been before. Maya glanced toward the courthouse clock. The afternoon light had shifted through the tall windows, turning the polished wood a deeper gold. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere in the city, familiar and distant. Inside, the trial continued its steady march. Brooks stood again. "Your Honor, the state calls Marcus Reed." Angela Reed closed her eyes. The rear courtroom doors opened. Marcus entered slowly, dressed in a dark suit that did not quite hide the stiffness in his shoulder. A faint scar marked the skin beneath one eye. He walked with dignity, but every step carried the memory of pavement, flashing lights, and a baton raised in the dark. Harlan stared at him. Marcus did not look away, and for the first time since the trial began, the man who had once owned the street had to face the young man he failed to break. Marcus Reed walked to the witness stand with the careful steadiness of someone who had learned that pain could return without warning. His suit was clean and dark, his tie neatly knotted, but his left shoulder did not move quite like the right. Every few steps there was a small restraint in his posture, a private negotiation with an injury the courtroom could not fully see. He raised his right hand and took the oath. His mother watched from the gallery, with both hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Judge Maya Williams noticed, then turned her attention back to Marcus. Her own cheek was bruised now, the torn robe still pinned at the front, but her voice remained calm. "Mr. Reed," Maya said, "take your time. Speak clearly. This court will hear you." Marcus nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Assistant District Attorney Daniel Brooks approached the podium, but he did not rush into the hard questions. "Mr. Reed, how old are you?" 22. "Are you currently a student?" "Yes, sir. Senior year." Mechanical engineering. Where do you work? At a grocery distribution warehouse on the west side. Night shift mostly. Loading inventory. Whatever they need. Brooks nodded. On the night Officer Harlan stopped you, where were you coming from? Work? What were you doing before you drove home? Marcus swallowed. I bought gas. Then I called my mom, told her I was heading home. She doesn't sleep until she knows I'm in the driveway. A soft ache moved through the gallery. It was such an ordinary detail that it made everything else worse. Brooks asked, "Did you know your taillight was damaged?" "No, sir. I didn't know until later." When the flashing police signals appeared in your rearview mirror, a thought struck you. What have I done? You pulled over to the side of the road. Why? Marcus questioned, his brow furrowed, as if the answer was self-evident. Because that's protocol. Harlan adjusted his position at the defense table, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Thomas Greer leaned in, his expression stern, and Harlan averted his gaze. Brooks continued, "What transpired after you stopped the vehicle?" I placed the transmission in park, illuminated the interior, and kept my hands firmly on the steering wheel. Marcus paused. "My father instructed me on that before he passed away," he explained. "Son, when you're stopped, don't give them any reason." His mother bowed her head. Brooks's tone softened. "What did Officer Harlan say as he approached?" "He inquired if I was aware of the reason for the stop." I responded negatively. "He stated my taillight was broken." I apologized and requested permission to exit the vehicle to inspect it. "Did he grant your request?" "No. He instructed me to remain silent." The courtroom hushed. "What happened next?" Marcus took a deep breath. "He asked where I was coming from." I replied, "Work." He then asked what I was doing in that particular area. I stated I resided there. He then chuckled. Brooks glanced at his notes. "Did Officer Harlan ask you to exit the vehicle?" "Yes." "Did you comply?" "Yes, sir." I opened the door slowly, keeping my hands visible. "Did you reach for your waistband?" "No." "Did you make any threats?" "No." "Did you offer any resistance?" Marcus met Harlan's gaze for the first time. "No." Harlan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Brooks moved closer. "Please recount for the court the subsequent events." Marcus's right hand instinctively moved towards his ribs. The officer stepped very close enough for Marcus to detect the aroma of coffee on his breath. "He claimed I had an attitude," Marcus recounted. "I denied it, stating I was simply trying to get home. He then struck me on the side with his baton." His mother closed her eyes. Marcus continued, his voice now softer. "I couldn't breathe. I doubled over. He hit me again. I recall the car door against my back and then the pavement. I heard him shouting, but I couldn't make out all of his words. My ears were ringing." Brooks waited. "Do you recall anything he said with clarity?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes." Greer immediately rose. "Your Honor, I object unless the prosecution can establish the necessary foundation for this statement." Maya looked at Brooks. Brooks stated, "The witness is testifying to words spoken directly to him during the incident." "Objection overruled," Maya declared. "Mr. Reed may answer." Marcus's voice wavered momentarily before steadying. He said, "You people don't learn unless pain teaches you." The declaration seemed to cast a pall over the courtroom. Harlan leaned back, his lips pressed together, his eyes blazing with resentment rather than shame. Brooks inquired, "How did that statement make you feel?" "Like I wasn't a person," Marcus replied. "Like he had already made up his mind about me before he even reached my window." Maya's hand rested on the bench. No one in the room missed the bruise visible on her cheek as Marcus spoke. Violence had spilled from the street into the courtroom that morning, and suddenly the narrative required no imagination. Brooks approached the evidence table. "Mr. Reed, I'm going to inquire about your physical condition following your arrest. Did you require surgery?" "Yes, my shoulder." "Did you return to school immediately?" "No, I missed several weeks." "Did your life change?" Marcus offered a small, bitter smile. "Yes, sir. I used to drive home without giving it a second thought. Now I check every mirror twice. I don't linger in parked cars. I dislike seeing lights behind me. Even headlights can make my stomach clench sometimes." Brooks nodded. "Do you still intend to graduate?" "Yes." "And why is that?" Marcus looked toward his mother. "Because my mom sacrificed too much for me not to." Angela Reed quickly wiped her face. Brooks let the moment settle. No further questions. Thomas Greer rose for cross-examination. His movements were deliberate and respectful, born of necessity. "Mr. Reed, you were frightened that night." "Yes." "Fear can affect one's memory, can it not?" "It can." "You were in pain." "Yes, pain can also affect memory." Marcus looked at him. "Some things pain makes you remember more vividly." Greer paused. "You harbor animosity towards Officer Harran." "I'm afraid of him." "That was not my question." Marcus glanced at Maya, then back at Greer. I don't hate him, if that's what you're implying. I don't wish to become like him. The gallery fell silent once more, but this silence carried a different weight, a blend of sorrow and dignity. Greer looked down at his notes, seemingly realizing there was no safe avenue to pursue. No further questions. As Marcus descended from the witness stand, he passed the defense table. Harlan finally spoke, his voice barely audible. Still playing the victim. Marcus stopped. The bailiff moved, but Maya raised her hand slightly. Marcus turned and faced Harlan. His voice remained steady. No, I'm still standing. For the first time that day, Harlan was without a response. Marcus returned to the gallery, and his mother took his hand the moment he sat down, holding it as she might have when he was a child crossing a busy street. Brooks stood again, his face now etched with a different solemnity. Your Honor, the state moves to introduce recovered audio from Officer Harlan's body camera buffer. Greer was on his feet instantly. Objection! We have not had adequate time for review. Brooks turned a folder toward the bench. The file was disclosed this morning as soon as the state crime lab recovered it. The metadata has been authenticated. The defense received a copy. Maya looked at Greer. Did the defense receive the file? Greer hesitated. Yes, Your Honor, but I will still argue that we were not provided sufficient time. Harlan's expression shifted, subtly but unmistakably. The anger remained, but beneath it, something colder surfaced. Recognition, fear, perhaps not fully formed but present. Maya noticed it. Brooks noticed it. Even Greer, his complexion paling, seemed to grasp the implications. Maya leaned forward slightly. Mr. Brooks, please prepare the exhibit. The clerk dimmed the screen. The speakers emitted a faint electronic hum, and in the stillness preceding the recording's playback, Vance Harlan appeared, for the first time, like a man who had just recalled the single thing he had failed to conceal. The courtroom speakers hummed once, then settled into a soft static that compelled everyone to lean in unconsciously. Judge Maya Williams looked from the clerk to Assistant District Attorney Daniel Brooks. Before this exhibit is played, she announced, the court will remind everyone present that there will be no outbursts, no commentary, and no movement toward the exits unless directed by security. This is evidence, and it will be treated as such. Her voice was calm, but the warning held the room captive. Vance Harlan sat rigid at the defense table, his hands clasped before him, his knuckles white. Thomas Greer leaned close and whispered, "Whatever is on that recording, you do not react. Do you understand me?" Harlan did not respond. Greer's voice dropped lower. "Vance, I heard you." Harlan muttered, "I heard you." Maya observed the movement of his lips, the tension in his shoulders, the barely suppressed fury beneath the fear. She had encountered men like him in interrogation rooms years ago, back when she served in the army, and learned that silence could be more potent than shouting. A man who believed himself untouchable did not become humble when cornered. He became unpredictable. "Proceed, Mr. Brooks," she instructed. Brooks nodded to the clerk. The audio commenced with the rush of wind and distant traffic. Tires whispered across wet pavement. A car door opened. Then came Marcus Reed's voice, youthful and tense, yet polite. "Officer, can you tell me what I did wrong?" Then Harlan's voice, sharper, closer to the microphone. "Step out of the car." "Yes, sir." "I'm stepping out. Hands where I can see them." "They are, sir." There was a scuffle, not the kind suggesting a fight, but rather movement. Fabric rustled, shoes scraped on pavement. Then Marcus's voice again. "I'm not resisting." The first blow landed through the speakers with a dull, heavy crack. Angela Reed covered her mouth. Marcus sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the floor, his jaw set. The older woman comforting Angela reached over and gripped her shoulder. The second blow followed. Marcus cried out on the recording, a sound not theatrical or polished, but raw and human. "Please stop, I didn't do anything." Haran stared at the table. His breathing grew audible. On the audio, his own voice returned, breathless and laced with contempt. "You people always say that." The room seemed to shrink. Brooks did not look at the jury box, though no jury was present. He looked at Maya, then at the defense table, assessing the unfolding impact. The recording continued. Marcus gasped. "I'm just trying to go home." Harlan's voice lowered into something colder. "This is my street. You don't move here unless I let you move. Another impact. Another cry. Then the sentence that irrevocably altered the atmosphere. You people don't belong here. You don't learn unless pain teaches you. The audio clicked, crackled, and then fell silent for several seconds. No one moved. The courthouse, with its aged walls, sturdy wood, high ceilings, and history of witnessing harsh pronouncements in measured tones, now absorbed something unfiltered. This was not calculated. It was not concealed behind procedure. It emerged raw from the dark underbelly of a traffic stop, brought into the light by a machine Harlan believed had failed him. Maya allowed the silence to persist. She understood that truth, once introduced, needed space to be recognized. Finally, Brooks spoke. Your Honor, the state requests that the recovered body camera audio be admitted as Exhibit 12. Greer stood slowly, his face drained of nearly all color. Your Honor, the defense maintains its objection to the late admission of this file and reserves the right to challenge the chain of custody. Noted, Maya stated. The court will allow further argument on foundation, but the exhibit is admitted for purposes of this hearing. Harlan's head snapped up. Of course it is. Greer turned sharply. Do not. Harlan ignored him. His eyes were now fixed on Maya, no longer merely angry, but wounded in a way only arrogance could be. He had not heard the pain in Marcus's voice. He had only heard the exposure of his own actions. Maya looked down at him. Mr. Harlan, you will control yourself. He laughed, a hollow sound devoid of strength. Control myself? That recording doesn't show what it was like out there. It shows what was said. It shows 12 seconds. It shows enough to require explanation. His face darkened. You've already made up your mind. This court has made no finding of guilt. You don't have to. I can see it on your face. Maya's expression remained unchanged. What you see is a judge listening to evidence. No, he said, standing before Greer could intervene. What I see is somebody who wanted this from the start. The bailiff moved closer. Maya's voice remained low. Sit down. You heard what you wanted to hear. I heard your voice. You heard a cop trying to survive. I heard a man beating another man who was begging him to stop. That sentence struck with greater force than the gavel could have. Harlan froze for a single instant, and in that moment, the room saw him clearly. The anger was still present, but it had fractured, revealing humiliation beneath, and fear beneath that. And beneath the fear lay the ingrained belief that if he could just apply enough pressure, threaten loudly enough, dominate completely enough, the world would revert to a shape he understood. You don't know survival, he declared. Maya leaned forward slightly. Do not confuse survival with cruelty. His mouth twitched. Brooks watched intently. Greer whispered, Sit down, Vance. But Harlan remained standing. Maya continued. The law does not become optional simply because the night is dark. A badge does not transform fear into permission. Angela Reed lifted her head. Marcus looked at Maya for the first time since the audio concluded. Harlan pointed toward Marcus. He's not innocent. Maya responded instantly. In this courtroom, innocence is not determined by your anger. He ran his mouth, so did you. A faint shock rippled through the gallery, not because Maya had raised her voice, but because she had not. Her words were quiet, precise, and devastating. Harlan's eyes narrowed. You think you're clever? I think you are finished interrupting. You don't get to talk to me like I'm some criminal. You are a defendant before the court. I'm a police officer. You were a police officer when that recording was made, Maya stated. That is precisely why it matters. For the first time, Harlan looked away. It lasted only a second, but everyone witnessed it. The mask had slipped. Not fallen, not yet, but slipped enough to reveal that the man behind it understood the ground was shifting beneath him. Maya turned toward Brooks. Call your next witness, Mr. Brooks. Brooks gathered a file from the table. The state calls Sergeant Linda Carver from Internal Affairs. At the mention of Internal Affairs, Harlan's body stiffened. The courtroom doors opened, and Sergeant Carver entered, a thick binder tucked under her arm. She was in her early 60s, with graying hair, broad shoulders, and dressed in a plain charcoal suit. She moved with the weary discipline of a woman who had spent too many years watching complaints disappear into bureaucratic drawers. Harlan leaned toward Greer. No, they can't bring her in. Greer did not respond. Carver took the oath and sat in the witness chair. She placed the binder before her, opened it, and adjusted her glasses. Brooks approached. Sergeant Carver, how long have you worked in internal affairs? 27 years. And did your office receive complaints involving Officer Vance Haar? Carver looked at Harlan, then back at Brooks. Yes, she confirmed. Many? A murmur moved through the gallery before Maya silenced it with a look. Brooks asked, "How many formal complaints?" Carver turned a page. 43. The number landed like a physical object dropped in the center of the room. Harlan pushed back from the table. That's garbage. Maya's eyes fixed on him. Sit still. Carver continued, her voice flat and heavy with years of suppressed frustration. Excessive force, racial harassment, unlawful searches, threats, missing evidence, retaliation against complainants. Brooks asked how many resulted in disciplinary action. Carver did not need to consult the file. None. This silence was unlike any other. It was no longer shock. It was recognition. Maya looked at the binder, then at Harlan, then at the bruised young man seated beside his mother. The audio had opened the door. Now, the past was beginning to walk in behind it. Sergeant Linda Carver's words lacked dramatic flair, which somehow made them more impactful. She read from the binder as if recounting weather damage after a storm. One report after another, each entry flat on paper but weighted with the lives behind it. Complaint filed by Taryn Wilkes, age 19, alleging unlawful stop, physical intimidation, and threat of arrest without cause. Dismissed for insufficient evidence. She turned a page. Complaint filed by Denise Carter on behalf of her son, Malik Carter, age 17. Alleged excessive force during a pedestrian stop. Dismissed. After the complainant failed to appear for a follow-up interview, Assistant District Attorney Daniel Brooks stood near the podium. Sergeant Carver, do your notes indicate why Mrs. Carter failed to appear? Carver looked down through her glasses. Yes. She reported receiving repeated patrol visits near her home after filing the complaint. A low sound emanated from the gallery. Not quite a gasp, not quite a groan, but something older than surprise. The sound of people hearing what they had always suspected, finally spoken under oath. Judge Maya Williams raised one hand slightly, and the room quieted. Brooks continued. Were these patrol visits documented as official follow-ups? No. Were they assigned by dispatch? No. Who initiated them? Carver looked at the page, then at Harlan. Officer Harlan's unit was logged in the area 3 times in 4 days. Harlan leaned toward Thomas Greer. She's twisting it, Greer whispered back. Stop reacting, she's lying, she has records, she has scraps. Maya's gaze shifted to the defense table. Mr. Harlan, if you speak again while this witness is testifying, you will be removed. Harlan looked at her bruised face, then at the pinned tear in her robe, and his lip curled. You'd like that. Maya did not blink. I would prefer order. Do not confuse that with preference. The line settled in the room with quiet authority. Brooks turned back to Carver. Sergeant, you testified there were 43 formal complaints. How many informal complaints did Internal Affairs receive? Carver's mouth tightened. Many more calls, letters, walk-ins. Some people came in, then left before signing anything. Why would they leave? Carver hesitated. Maya leaned forward slightly. Sergeant, answer the question. Because they were afraid, Carver said. Afraid of what? Retaliation, losing a son to another charge, having probation violated, being stopped again. Some were afraid no one would believe them. Marcus Reed sat beside his mother, his eyes fixed on the floor. Angela Reed took his hand. Brooks walked slowly to the evidence table and lifted a second folder. Did you ever recommend disciplinary action against Officer Harlan? Yes. How many times? 6. What happened to those recommendations? Carver's eyes hardened, making her appear suddenly less weary and more angry. They were reduced, rejected, or buried. By whom? Greer stood. Objection. Calls for speculation unless the witness has direct knowledge. Brooks appeared ready. Sergeant Carver personally submitted the recommendations and received responses through command review. Maya nodded. Overruled. The witness may answer as to her direct knowledge. Carver turned another page. Captain Elias Thorpe rejected 4 recommendations. Deputy Chief Raymond Vossler returned one for revision until the finding was changed to unsubstantiated. One disappeared from the file entirely until I found a scanned copy in an archive system last year. The name Captain Thorpe produced the first visible crack in Harlan's posture. His shoulders lifted slightly, his eyes sharpened. Brooks noticed. "Sergeant, was Captain Thorpe Officer Harlan's supervising commander?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Most of Officer Harlan's career." Brooks let that statement hang in the air. "Did Captain Thorpe ever describe Officer Harlan to you?" Carver looked down. "Once." "What did he say?" Greer stood again. "Objection. Hearsay." Brooks replied. "Statement by a supervising official during an internal review process." Maya considered it. "Allowed for the limited purpose of explaining internal affairs handling. The court will weigh it accordingly." Carver's voice lowered. "He said Harlan was rough around the edges, but he got results." The phrase sounded ordinary, but in that courtroom, it echoed like permission disguised as management. Brooks asked, "In your experience, what did that phrase mean?" Greer rose halfway, but Maya looked at him, and he sat back down. Carver answered, "It meant people in command knew he used force others wouldn't, and they valued that until it became a liability." Harlan exploded. "That's not true." The bailiff moved immediately. Maya's voice cut through the room. "Mr. Harlan." "No," Heron snapped, standing. "No, I'm not sitting here while some washed-up IA witch rewrites my career." Greer grabbed at his sleeve. "Sit down." Harlan jerked away. "Get your hands off me!" Maya's eyes remained fixed on him. "Sit down, now." He pointed at Carver. "You hated cops like me because we did what you couldn't." Carver remained still in the witness chair, but her expression shifted. Not fear, but exhaustion. She looked like a woman who had waited decades for this moment and wished it had arrived sooner. Maya spoke again. "Officer Harlan, this is your final instruction." He laughed harshly. "There it is again." "Officer, when you want to shame me." "Defendant," Maya corrected, "when you want to bury me." "You are both." Maya stated, "That is the tragedy." The word struck something deep within him. His countenance deepened in color. "Do not lecture me on misfortune. You sit there feigning this to be righteousness." Maya's tone remained subdued. "Righteousness is not an act of pretense. You possess no comprehension of the streets. I comprehend sufficiently to discern malevolence when it is clad in a uniform." The entire chamber fell into an absolute hush. Harlan's mouth parted slightly. For a fleeting moment, he appeared utterly taken aback that she had identified him so directly. Then the rage surged anew, amplified and more monstrous, no longer constrained by any calculated approach, any counsel, or any apprehension of repercussions. "Do you imagine that garment renders you beyond reproach?" he demanded. Greer fully assumed an upright posture. "Your Honor, I request a brief intermission." "Denied." Maya stated, her gaze still fixed upon Harlan. "The accused shall resume their seat." Harlan took a single step laterally away from the table. The bailiff repositioned himself. Brooks withdrew from the lectern. Marcus Reed instinctively shifted closer to his mother. Maya slowly ascended from the bench. The rent judicial robe settled unevenly about her, the pinned material tugging faintly at her shoulder. She appeared diminished, standing, compared to Harlan, older, visibly bearing the marks of an assault. Yet the atmosphere of the room seemed to converge around her, rather than him. "Mr. Harlan," she articulated, "you have misinterpreted forbearance for timidity throughout this entire morning. That misjudgment concludes at this precise moment." His respiration became pronounced. "You aim to debase me," he declared. "You have accomplished that feat yourself." His legal representative whispered, "Vance, I implore you." However, Harlan no longer registered any other voices. His focus had sharpened to solely Maya. All else faded from his perception. The witness, the victim, the journalists, the recording apparatus in the corner,
the official transcript being meticulously compiled. All he perceived was the woman of color on the bench who refused to yield, refused to flinch, and refused to permit him to transmute aggression into authority.
"Do you deem yourself superior to me?" he bellowed. Maya responded without a trace of hesitation. "No, I deem you answerable to the same legal statutes as every other individual." That pronouncement was the ultimate blow. Harlan's features contorted into an expression far surpassing mere anger. He propelled Greer with such force that the attorney staggered backward into his chair. The bailiff vocalized his name and moved with haste, but Harlan had already initiated his movement, colliding with the defense table as he maneuvered around it. A shriek pierced the air, chairs scraped noisily. Sergeant Carver rose from the witness enclosure, a file folder clutched tightly in one hand. Marcus instinctively pulled his mother further back. Maya remained standing behind the judicial dais. Harlan's eyes remained locked upon her. "You have no right to pass judgment upon me," he roared, and then he charged. Harlan advanced with the unthinking impetuosity of a man who had spent his existence believing that sheer impetus was synonymous with true power. The defense table lurched violently as his hip impacted its corner, sending documents scattering across the floor. Thomas Greer crashed backward into his seat, one hand raised as if that solitary gesture could possibly retrieve his client from the precipice of ruin. Sergeant Linda Carver detached herself from the witness stand, her binder pressed firmly against her chest. Marcus Reed guided his mother behind them, positioning his own body as a barrier between her and the open aisle. Before he had even registered his own action, the bailiff lunged from Harlan's right side. "Harlan, cease your actions." Harlan swung his arm with considerable force, repelling the bailiff's hand. The movement lacked precision, discipline, or the controlled execution of an officer apprehending a suspect. It was raw fury given tangible form. He pushed past the man and headed directly for the bench, his gaze fixed intently on Judge Maya Williams. Maya did not retreat. She stood positioned behind the imposing wooden bench, her torn robe hanging askew, a dark discoloration spreading across her cheek, a faint trace of blood still visible at the edge of her lip. The courtroom became a cacophony around her, yet she appeared centered amidst the pandemonium, as motionless as a beacon enduring a tempest. "Harlan," she declared, her voice cutting through the din with absolute clarity. "Halt your advance at this very spot." He vaulted over the low barrier that demarcated the main courtroom area from the judicial platform. "You do not issue commands to me." "Indeed," Maya affirmed, "I do." That retort struck him with the impact of a further insult. His face twisted in frustration. He grasped the edge of the bench with both hands and hoisted himself upward, one knee striking the polished wood surface. A substantial legal tome toppled. Then, the small microphone bent precariously to the side with a sharp metallic snap. The court stenographer cried out. Someone from the rear of the room urgently called for security personnel. The surveillance camera positioned above the public gallery continued its unwavering recording. Every passing second, every motion, every countenance captured. Haran ascended over the bench in a surge of violent energy. One hand reached out, aiming for Maya's throat, the other already drawing back as if to deliver another blow. He anticipated her withdrawal. He expected to witness fear. He anticipated the room itself yielding to his ferocity, just as it invariably had in darkened alleyways and constricted corridors. Maya offered him none of that. At the precise final instant, she shifted her position. It was not a theatrical maneuver, it was executed with absolute precision. A brief pivot of her left foot, a subtle adjustment of her shoulders, a movement born of someone who had previously undergone training not for display, but for survival. Harlan's momentum carried him forward, past the location where she had been standing. His hand swept through empty air. Mia seized his wrist. Her grip tightened with remarkable swiftness, intensity, and unerring accuracy. For an infinitesimal fraction of a second, Harlan registered surprise. Then Mia rotated her hips, expertly guiding his forward momentum downwards and away, and forcefully drove the heel of her opposite palm into the outer aspect of his elbow. The joint locked against itself with a sickening crunch. A sharp, audible crack reverberated through the courtroom. Harlan's roar transformed into a choked shriek of agony. Before his body could even begin to react to the pain, Maya stepped forward, twisted his captured wrist, and forced his arm behind his back. His knees buckled beneath him due to the excruciating sensation. She did not engage in a physical struggle against his strength. She redirected it, contorted it, and utilized the very violence he had introduced into the chamber as the instrument of his downfall. He collapsed onto the floor behind the bench, landing face first. The impact sent a tremor through the wood. Air burst from his lungs in a harsh, guttural sound. Maya followed him down, positioning one knee firmly between his shoulder blades, his injured arm secured at an angle that offered no possibility of resistance. Harlan attempted to push himself up using his free hand, but she expertly shifted her weight, demonstrating calm and merciless efficiency. "Do not move," she commanded. He moaned, blood spreading from his nose onto the floorboards. "You have broken my arm. You have assaulted the court," Maya retorted. The bailiff arrived at the judicial platform a moment later, his breathing heavy. A look of profound shock registered on his face as he surveyed the scene before him. The individual he had failed to apprehend was already subdued. Not merely subdued, but completely under control. Maya Williams, her attire torn and bearing the marks of an assault, held him there with the unshakable authority of someone who had never required imposing stature to command an entire room. "Apprehend him," she instructed. The bailiff blinked once, then complied. "Yes, Your Honor." Harlan attempted to wrench himself free as the bailiff grasped his uninjured wrist. Maya increased the pressure just enough to immobilize him. "I stated, 'Do not move,'" she repeated, her voice firm. This time, he heeded her command. Not from respect for the order, but because pain had finally imparted to him what arrogance had failed to teach. 2 courthouse deputies burst through the side entrances, their weapons drawn, their expressions a mixture of tension and uncertainty. They hesitated when they observed Harlan pinned to the floor. Maya looked at them. "Holster your firearms, secure the defendant, and summon medical assistance. The bailiff may have sustained injuries. The defendant also requires evaluation." One deputy immediately holstered his weapon. The other stared for a moment longer, then followed suit. Harlan's legal counsel stood several feet distant, his hands trembling, his mouth agape. He appeared as a man witnessing not only the disintegration of a legal defense, but also the collapse of a long-held personal narrative concerning the perceived invincibility of certain badges of authority. Across the chamber, Angela Reed clutched Marcus's arm tightly. Marcus gazed at Heron on the floor, not with any sense of delight or vindication, but with an expression that seemed far too burdensome for his young countenance. He had encountered that same man standing over him on the pavement. He had heard that same voice declare that pain was a form of instruction. Now, the lesson had been inverted. Sergeant Carver's binder had slipped from her grasp. Pages lay scattered near the witness stand, like fragments of a history the room could no longer contain. The deputies took charge, handling Harlan's injured arm with care, but with a firmness that made it unequivocally clear he no longer held any authority over anyone. He uttered curses through the blood and gritted teeth as they helped him to his feet. "She attacked me," he rasped. "You all witnessed it. She attacked me?" No one responded. The camera had documented every detail. Maya slowly rose from the floor. Her cheek throbbed. Her ribs ached from the impact with the table earlier. Her robe was irrevocably damaged, and her hands trembled for a brief moment before she clasped them together in front of her and stilled them. She now looked at Harlan, who was bent between 2 deputies, his face swollen, his eyes wild with mortification. "You are not the law," she declared, each word articulated with sufficient clarity for the court reporter to record. "You are a man who violated it." Harlan spat blood onto the floor. "This is not over." Maya's gaze remained unwavering. "No, Mr. Harlan, it has merely commenced." The deputies began escorting him toward the side exit. He struggled once, then cried out as the movement sent agonizing pain through his arm. The sound reverberated throughout the courtroom, raw and stripped of any pretense he had carried into the chamber that morning. The gallery remained motionless until the doors slammed shut behind him. Then, the room began to exhale. Maya turned towards the clerk. "Secure all courtroom video recordings immediately." Inform courthouse administration and the state police. No copies are to leave this facility without express court authorization." The clerk nodded briskly. "Yes, Your Honor." Maya then addressed Daniel Brooks. "Mr. Brooks, the official record will state that the defendant physically assaulted the presiding judge during open court proceedings." Brooks's voice was subdued. "Yes, Your Honor." She then turned her attention to the gallery, where fear, astonishment, and recognition were palpable on every face. "This court is hereby recessed until the security personnel have concluded their report." Only then did Mia step down from the bench. She moved with deliberate caution, but she did not lean on anyone for support. The torn robe swayed about her knees, and the small droplets of water that had dried on the fabric were now mingled with blood and dust from the floor. Marcus Reed observed her passage. "Judge Williams?" he said softly. She paused and looked at him. He swallowed. "Thank you." Maya's expression softened for the first time that day, though only subtly. "Do not thank me for fulfilling my legal obligations, Mr. Reed." She then proceeded through the side door, leaving behind a courtroom where silence had finally been shattered and where every concealed matter was about to be brought into the open. The side door closed behind Judge Maya Williams, and for a brief interval, the courtroom remained suspended between the immediate aftermath and the unfolding consequences. No one spoke with their full voice. People conversed in hushed fragments, gathered their belongings, checked on each other's well-being, and cast glances toward the path where Vance Harlan had been forcibly removed by deputies. The polished floor behind the bench still bore a smear of blood from his fractured nose. The torn pages from Sergeant Linda Carver's binder lay scattered near the witness stand, resembling evidence refusing to remain contained. Marcus Reed assisted his mother in rising. Angela Reed's hand trembled against his sleeve, but her gaze remained fixed on the judicial bench. "He truly believed he could do that," she whispered. Marcus directed his attention to the security camera situated above the gallery. He overlooked the fact that someone was observing. Across the room, Assistant District Attorney Daniel Brooks was already acting with considerable urgency. He approached the clerk's station, his voice low but firm. "Ensure that the courtroom video footage is properly secured before any administrative personnel handle it. Every viewpoint, all feeds, with timestamps meticulously preserved." The clerk nodded, his face pale but his demeanor steady. Judge Williams ordered it sealed. "Excellent," Brooks stated. "Then seal it twice." Thomas Greer remained near the defense table, staring intently at his hands as if they belonged to someone else entirely. Mere minutes prior, those hands had been attempting to restrain a client. Now, they were empty. His case files were strewn across the floor, yet he made no move to collect them. A young deputy approached him with caution. "Mr. Greer, courthouse security requires your statement." Greer swallowed. "My statement?" "Yes, sir. You were assaulted by your client." The word client seemed to impact him more profoundly than assaulted. Greer glanced toward the side exit, then toward the bench, and finally at the spot where Maya had stood after subduing Harlan. "I cautioned him," Greer said quietly. "I informed him to desist." The deputy offered no verbal response. He had heard men offer similar justifications following catastrophic events on prior occasions. Sometimes their words were directed at the legal system. Other times, they were merely spoken to themselves. By late afternoon, every television station in the city had deployed a mobile unit outside the courthouse. Camera crews lined the grand staircase. Reporters stood beneath overcast skies, microphones in hand, reiterating identical phrases with varying intonations. Violent outburst, courtroom attack, state judge assaulted, officer subdued. The initial public declaration originated from the police department shortly after 5 o'clock. It was delivered by Deputy Chief Raymond Vossler from a podium at departmental headquarters. He appeared solemn. He seemed to be reciting from a prepared script. "The department unequivocally condemns the conduct exhibited by Officer Vance Harlan in court today," Vossler announced, reading from a printed document. "His actions appear to have been an individual emotional breakdown during an exceptionally demanding legal proceeding. They do not represent the values of this department or the thousands of officers who serve with honor each day." Questions erupted before he had even concluded his remarks. "Deputy Chief, was Officer Harlan still on active duty? Were there prior complaints filed against him? Was the department aware of his instability? Did the command staff review his personnel file prior to today's events? Vossler raised one hand. An internal review will be conducted. At this juncture, we urge the public to refrain from drawing sweeping generalizations based on the unacceptable behavior of a single individual. Inside a modest conference room within the courthouse, Daniel Brooks observed the statement on a wall-mounted television screen in the company of 2 state investigators and a senior prosecutor from the Attorney General's office. No one spoke until Vossler uttered the phrase, "a single individual," for the 3rd time. Brooks deactivated the television. "They are constructing a barrier around him," one investigator remarked. Brooks shook his head. "No, they are erecting a barrier between him and themselves." The senior prosecutor, Karen Whittam, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a voice honed by 30 years of prosecuting public corruption cases, leaned back in her chair. "That indicates they are aware of additional information." Brooks's gaze dropped to the evidence inventory list. There is invariably more when a department reacts with such alacrity. Meanwhile, in a secure holding area beneath the courthouse, Vance Harlan sat handcuffed to a metal bench. His injured arm was propped awkwardly in a makeshift sling. His face had begun to distend. Dried blood caked beneath his nose. A deputy stood near the doorway, maintaining a silent vigil. Harlan stared blankly at the wall. He had experienced anger before. He had endured humiliation previously, but this was distinct. This event had been public, meticulously documented, witnessed by journalists, prosecutors, civilians, his own attorney, and, most damagingly, Marcus Reed. The image replayed incessantly in his mind, not of the blow he had delivered, nor of the tearing of the robe, but of the precise moment Judge Maya Williams sidestepped and dismantled his arm, as if his strength held absolutely no consequence. The door creaked open. Thomas Greer entered with measured steps, escorted by the deputy. His suit jacket was creased, and his face bore the weary, hollow expression of a man who already knew the answers to every question he was about to pose. "You need to listen very carefully," Greer stated. Harlan emitted a bitter laugh. "You're here to inform me that I'm in trouble? You have surpassed mere trouble. She initiated an assault on me." Greer fixed him with a steady gaze. "There is video evidence from 4 courtroom cameras. I was provoked. You deliberately splashed water in a judge's face. You tore her robe. You physically dragged her from the bench. You struck her. Subsequently, you charged at her again after being explicitly ordered to cease your actions." Harlan's nostrils flared. "She made me appear weak." Greer's expression underwent a transformation then. Not anger, a dawning realization. "No, Vance, you accomplished that yourself." Harlan leaned forward as far as the handcuffs permitted. "You are employed by me. I represent you," Greer asserted. "There exists a distinction between those roles." For several seconds, the only sound was the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Greer continued. "The state will be filing additional charges. Assault on a judicial officer. Attempted murder may be considered depending on how they interpret the second physical confrontation. You also assaulted court personnel and myself. You are not lodging any complaints. I may not have a choice in the matter." Harlan's eyes sharpened perceptibly. "Do not forget who has supported your firm throughout these many years." Greer stepped back slightly. There it was again. The familiar rhetoric of favors owed, of loyalty expected, of pressure exerted. The unspoken system of exchange that had afforded men like Harlan protection for far too extended a period. "I intend to withdraw as counsel, should the court grant permission," Greer stated. Harlan stared at him, his eyes narrowed. "You are a coward." Greer opened the door, then paused. "Perhaps, but at least I recognize when a man is on the verge of sinking." He departed without awaiting a response. Upstairs, Maya Williams sat in her chambers while a courthouse nurse attended to the laceration on her lip. Her torn robe lay folded neatly over a chair. Stripped of that ceremonial attire, clad in a charcoal dress and sensible footwear, she appeared less like an abstract symbol and more like the individual she had always been. A woman who had mastered the art of enduring hardship without transforming it into a public spectacle. The nurse dabbed antiseptic at the corner of her mouth. "You ought to proceed to the hospital," she advised. "I shall," Maya replied, "after the evidence has been secured." You were subjected to an assault, Your Honor. Maya glanced toward the window. Outside, reporters were congregating beneath umbrellas. As was the law, she mused. A soft knock sounded at the door. Daniel Brooks entered only after receiving explicit permission. Your Honor, he began. The department is characterizing this as an isolated emotional breakdown. Maya emitted a small, humorless exhalation. Naturally they are. We have secured the video footage. All streams, with no interruptions. Excellent. Brooks hesitated. There is an additional development. The body camera audio recording from Marcus Reed's traffic stop is already circulating widely. Someone has leaked the complete file. Maya turned slowly. Brooks continued. Not merely the 12 seconds that were presented in court, the entire recovered segment. The racial slurs are more egregious, considerably worse. For the first time that day, Maya closed her eyes, not from surprise, but from the sheer weight of anticipating what was about to unfold. When she reopened them, her voice was remarkably quiet. Then this is no longer exclusively a state matter. Brooks nodded. The FBI contacted us 10 minutes ago. Outside, the city was beginning to comprehend the true extent of what had been articulated in the darkness along Benton Avenue. By nightfall, Vance Harlan would cease to be merely one aggressive officer experiencing one difficult day. He would become the gateway, the opening, into 15 years of suppressed complaints, misplaced evidence, broken bodies, and a silence enforced by pervasive fear. Maya reached for the torn robe and gently touched the ripped fabric once. Good, she declared. Let them unveil every hidden aspect. The Federal Bureau of Investigation did not arrive with the blare of sirens. They appeared the following morning in unassuming dark sedans, navigating through the courthouse garage with the quiet, practiced efficiency of individuals who did not require ostentatious displays to convey their authority. By that hour, the city had already collectively witnessed the security camera footage depicting Vance Harlan charging directly at Judge Maya Williams. By that hour, the leaked body camera audio had been broadcast on local radio during the morning commutes, discussed in diners over cups of black coffee, debated in barbershops, within church offices, across police precinct break rooms, and within the confines of living rooms where older residents sat remarkably still, absorbing the resonance of a voice they recognized all too acutely. At 8:17 a.m., Special Agent Aaron Whitaker entered the state attorney's conference room, accompanied by 2 other federal agents and a slender leather portfolio held beneath his arm. He was in his early 50s, clean-shaven, projecting an aura of seriousness without any theatricality. The kind of man who appeared to have dedicated half his life to deciphering falsehoods presented across polished tables. Daniel Brooks rose upon his entrance. Karen Whittam remained seated, observing him over the rim of her spectacles. Agent Whitaker offered a single, concise nod. We are initiating a federal civil rights investigation into Officer Vance Harlan and any departmental personnel who may have facilitated or concealed misconduct. Brooks did not smile, but a palpable sense of relief washed over his features. We had anticipated this. Whitaker placed the portfolio on the table. You should anticipate more. The Justice Department has initiated a comprehensive inquiry demanding the preservation of all personnel records, documented complaints, disciplinary actions, dispatch logs, body camera archives, evidence room access logs, and any correspondence involving Harlan stretching back 15 years. Karen Whittam leaned forward, a flicker of unease crossing her face. That will undoubtedly put the department on edge, she observed. It should, Whitaker replied, his gaze steady. Meanwhile, across town, anxiety was a woefully inadequate descriptor for the palpable tension gripping the police headquarters. Deputy Chief Raymond Vossler had convened an urgent pre-dawn assembly. Commanders crowded into the conference room, their hands clutching paper cups of coffee, untouched pastries resting beside them, enveloped by the brittle quiet of individuals who recognized that the established protocols might no longer suffice. We maintain our composure, Vossler declared from his position at the head of the table. We comply with all lawful directives. We refrain from conjecture. We will not sacrifice the department due to one individual's loss of control. Captain Elias Thorpe, seated midway down the table, arms crossed, his expression unreadable, was older than Haran. His waist had broadened with age, and his face bore the weathered resilience of a man who had learned to survive by discerning when to speak and when to allow others to bear the brunt of adversity. A lieutenant cleared his throat. The federal request specifically mentions older complaints. Vossler's eyes narrowed. Then the legal department will review them. All of them. Every single one, Vossler confirmed. No one touches anything without legal counsel present. Thorpe stared intently into his coffee. Outwardly calm, his right knee betrayed his inner turmoil with a single, suppressed bounce beneath the table. The federal government's request for files was one matter. The federal government's discovery of those files was an entirely different proposition. At noon, federal agents executed the first search warrant at the 12th District Precinct. They encountered no resistance at the front desk. Their voices remained measured, and after presenting their credentials, they proceeded past stunned officers, entering the records division accompanied by an entourage of boxes, laptops, and a taciturn forensic technician clad in blue gloves. The precinct fell into an unprecedented stillness. Younger officers averted their gazes, looking towards the floor. The more seasoned officers observed from doorways, their faces etched with a mixture of resentment and apprehension. Some had held Haran in esteem, others had consciously avoided him, and a few had even shared his boisterous anecdotes over post-shift burgers at O'Malley's, rationalizing it as the rough talk of a dedicated officer performing demanding work. Now, federal agents were meticulously carrying out sealed containers, each bearing inventory labels identifying Haran. In a small interview chamber, Officer Ryan Kessler sat opposite Agent Whitaker, his hands clasped between his knees. He had already provided testimony in state court, but this situation felt markedly different. There was no audience, no judge, no public scrutiny, only a recording device, a federal badge, and the stark realization that any falsehood now could lead to incarceration. Whitaker opened a file. Officer Kessler, our investigation extends beyond Marcus Reed. Kessler's throat constricted. I assumed you would need names, supervisors, other officers, anyone who was aware. Kessler shifted his gaze to the wall. People were aware enough not to inquire. That is not a satisfactory response, Whitaker stated. No, Kessler replied quietly. That's simply how the department operated. Whitaker waited patiently. Kessler rubbed his hands over his face. Captain Thorpe provided him with protection. Not overtly, and seldom in writing. He would make comments like, Harland gets the difficult tasks completed, or, don't penalize a dog for biting when you keep it chained at the gate. Whitaker's pen paused momentarily. Kessler continued, his voice hushed. If complaints were filed, they were minimized. If evidence disappeared, no one sought an explanation. If someone in the community became too confrontational, they would suddenly find themselves stopped for every minor infraction. A broken taillight, an unpaid parking ticket, any small detail. It was a form of retaliation, yes, sometimes initiated by Haran, and sometimes by individuals attempting to curry his favor. By late afternoon, the scope of the investigation had broadened considerably. FBI agents visited the evidence storage facility and discovered discrepancies in chain of custody documentation. They retrieved what were labeled as corrupted body camera files and dispatched them to a federal laboratory. Subpoenas were issued for private telephone records, union communications, and duty rosters. What had initially appeared to be an isolated courtroom incident had evolved into a complex web, with each strand seemingly leading back to years of ingrained fear. At St. Catherine Medical Center, Marcus Reed sat in a physical therapy session, squeezing a rubber therapy ball in his injured hand. A television mounted high in the corner displayed footage of federal agents entering the 12th District Precinct. His mother sat beside him, her arms crossed tightly. They're finally paying attention, Angela stated. Marcus continued to squeeze the ball. I wonder how many people attempted to make them look before I did. Angela offered no reply. The answer was implicit in every complaint Sergeant Carver had reviewed from the binder, in every mother who ceased making inquiries, every young man who relocated, every neighbor who learned to avert their gaze when a patrol car slowed. On the screen, a reporter announced that Harlan's case might now encompass a pattern of civil rights violations. Marcus turned away. Pattern was a sterile term. Angela reached over and gently touched his wrist. Sometimes, sterile words are how difficult matters are finally documented. That evening, Judge Maya Williams returned to her residence, her cheeks visibly swollen and her judicial robe secured within an evidence bag. Her home occupied a tranquil street lined with mature maple trees, the sort of neighborhood where friendly waves from porches and comforting casseroles for the bereaved were commonplace. Her neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, awaited her near the steps, a covered dish in her hands. "I've prepared chicken and rice," Evelyn announced. "No arguments." Maya offered a faint smile. "I wasn't planning on any." Evelyn's gaze fell upon the bruise on Maya's face, and the shared smile vanished. "I saw the footage. Most everyone did. You genuinely frightened me, Maya." "I frightened myself once it was over," Maya admitted. Evelyn nodded, accepting the candid confession. Their long acquaintance precluded any pretense. "You were always such a stubborn individual." Maya accepted the dish. "My mother called it principled." Evelyn chuckled softly. "Your mother was always polite." A brief shared amusement passed between them. Evelyn then touched Maya's arm. "You absolutely did not deserve what he did." "No," Maya affirmed. "But what matters now is how the legal system addresses it." Inside, after Evelyn departed, Maya placed the meal in the refrigerator and stood alone in her kitchen. The house was unnervingly silent. The audio recording played repeatedly in her mind. Harlan's voice on the body camera, Marcus's pleas, the forceful impact. The words, "you people," spoken as if a verdict had already been rendered. She closed her eyes. Justice, she mused, was often silent, until that silence became a form of complicity. The following morning, Agent Whitaker's team uncovered the initial concealed thread. It originated from an archived complaint filed 12 years prior by Harold Benton, a retired postal worker, who had alleged that Harlan had assaulted his nephew during a search and misappropriated $400 from his wallet. The complaint had been dismissed. The money was never officially logged as evidence, and the nephew was subsequently arrested twice by officers from Harlan's unit. Subsequently, another complaint emerged, followed by yet another, and then an old video recording surfaced from a convenience store owner who had preserved a copy on a flash drive for 9 years, stating to the agents, "I figured someday someone might finally ask." By the week's conclusion, the FBI had amassed sufficient evidence to convene a federal grand jury. Harlan, confined to county detention with his arm immobilized and his face still bearing the marks from the courtroom incident, learned of this development from a public defender he had never previously encountered. "They aren't merely charging you with the courtroom assault," the young, visibly overworked attorney stated with painful honesty. Harlan stared at her, inquiring, "What else?" She slid the federal notice across the table. "Civil rights conspiracy, evidence tampering, retaliation against complainants, and a pattern and practice review tied directly to your unit." He glanced at the document, then back at her. "That's internal department matters." "No," she countered. "Now it's a federal matter." For the first time, Harlan did not raise his voice, curse, or pound the table. He simply sat there, breathing through his mouth, as the system he had once trusted to protect him began to operate against him. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Buses hissed at the curbs. Older gentlemen nursed coffee at diner counters, engaging in quiet debates over newspaper headlines. Church ladies passed around newspaper clippings after Bible study. Mothers telephoned their sons, urging them to drive with caution, to keep their hands visible, and to return home safely. Within the federal building, boxes of old files were systematically opened. Each buried complaint bore a name, and each name represented a story. And at long last, those stories had assembled a chorus of witnesses prepared to be heard. By the time the federal trial commenced, Vance Harlan no longer resembled the man who had entered the state courtroom with the conviction that the entire room belonged to him. The tailored navy suit was gone, as was the swagger, the gleaming badge, and the authoritative tone that had once compelled lesser men to yield. He sat at the defense table, attired in a plain dark suit provided by his public defender's office, his right arm still stiff from the injury inflicted by Maya Williams when he attempted to transform a courtroom into another street corner he could dominate. Federal Courtroom 6A was more expansive than Judge Williams's state courtroom, yet possessed a colder atmosphere. The walls were paneled in dark wood, and the Great Seal of the United States hung prominently above the bench. U.S. Marshals stood sentinel near the entrances, their watchful, unsmiling demeanor conveying a clear message. This was a space designed not for clamor, but for the solemn pronouncement of consequences. Harlan kept his gaze lowered as the jury returned their verdict. On count 1, deprivation of rights under color of law, the foreman announced, we find the defendant guilty. His public defender briefly closed her eyes. On count 2, conspiracy to violate civil rights. Guilty. Harlan's jaw tightened. On count 3, evidence tampering. Guilty. Behind him, the gallery remained profoundly silent. Many of the individuals seated there had awaited a venue like this for years. Harold Benton, the retired postal worker, sat with his hands clasped over the head of his cane. Denise Carter occupied a seat 2 rows behind Marcus Reed and his mother, her gaze fixed straight ahead as the verdicts were delivered sequentially. Sergeant Linda Carver was also present, not in uniform, but in a gray suit, her posture erect, her expression unreadable. By the time the clerk finished reading all the counts, Harlan had been convicted on almost every charge. The federal judge, the Honorable Arthur Langford, expressed his gratitude to the jury and formally dismissed them, setting the sentencing for the following month. However, no one in that courtroom needed a calendar to grasp the significance of the proceedings. Vance Harlan had not merely lost a legal case, he had lost the carefully constructed narrative that had sustained him for 15 years. When the sentencing day arrived, the courtroom was filled early. Reporters congregated in the marble hallway outside. Elderly residents from the South Side, dressed in their Sunday best, winter coats and polished shoes, filled the available seats. Some were present because they knew Marcus, others because they had experienced fear, and some simply to witness the law enact publicly what it had failed to accomplish quietly for far too long. Marcus Reed was the first to deliver a victim impact statement. He walked to the podium unaided. His shoulder remained stiff, and a faint scar beneath his eye caught the overhead light. But he stood tall. He appeared younger than the room's collective experience, yet paradoxically older than his years. Your Honor, Marcus began, for a considerable time after that night, I believed Officer Harlan had taken something from me that I would never recover. I struggled to sleep properly. I felt uneasy while driving, and I found myself overly alert to the sound of tires behind me. My mother resumed her vigil by the window, as if I were a young boy returning from school. Angela Reed looked down, tears already shimmering in her eyes. Marcus continued. He wanted me to feel insignificant. He wanted me to believe that my fear validated his power. However, standing here today, I've come to understand something profound. He was never truly powerful. He was protected. Harlan stared at the table. Marcus shifted slightly, not fully facing him, but enough for his words to resonate. You told me pain would teach me. It did. It taught me that silence shields the wrong individuals. It taught me that truth requires witnesses. And it taught me that standing up does not always signify the absence of fear. Sometimes, it means you are afraid, and you stand regardless. He stepped back from the podium. For a moment, an absolute stillness pervaded the room. Then, Angela reached for his hand. As he returned to his seat, Judge Maya Williams was next to speak. She did not wear her robe. Instead, she was attired in a charcoal suit, simple pearls, and the composed demeanor of a woman who understood the distinction between personal grievance and public duty. The bruise on her cheek had long since vanished, but everyone in the room remembered it. They had all seen the footage, and they all knew what had transpired when Harlan decided that even a judge's bench did not represent a sufficient boundary for him. She approached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and directed her initial gaze toward Judge Langford, deliberately avoiding eye contact with Harlan. Your Honor, she stated, when Vance Harlan attacked me in open court, he did more than assault a single individual. He revealed the underlying philosophy that had guided his actions for years. He believed that authority resided with the person most willing to inflict fear. He believed a badge could transform cruelty into duty. He believed prejudice could be concealed within bureaucratic procedures. The courtroom was utterly silent as Maya continued, her voice quiet, yet carrying to the furthest row. What happened to me lasted mere seconds, What transpired with Marcus Reed and many others endured for years. The more significant harm was not the torn robe or the bruise on my face. The greater injury was the prolonged practice of making citizens believe the law would not heed their pleas. Harlan's fingers curled into fists. Maya finally met his gaze. You inquired if someone like me could pass judgment upon you. The answer was never personal. The truth is that no one stands above the law. Not a judge, not a prosecutor, not an officer, and certainly not a man who conflates violence with respect. She turned back to Judge Langford. Justice is not an act of vengeance. Justice is the implementation of responsibility, even when it arrives with a delay. I implore this court to impose a sentence that is founded not on anger, but on truth. She then stepped away. Judge Langford remained silent for several seconds, meticulously reviewing his notes, then removed his spectacles. When he spoke, his voice was firm and deliberate. Vance Harlan, you were entrusted with extraordinary power by the public. You were issued a badge, a weapon, significant discretion, and the authority to intervene in the lives of citizens during their most vulnerable moments. You exploited that power to punish, intimidate, and degrade. When accountability finally arrived, you responded not with remorse, but with violence. Inside the courtroom, Harlan looked up, his face pale. The judge continued. This court has thoroughly examined the evidence, the documented pattern of conduct, the testimony of the victims, the complicity of others, and the assault upon Judge Williams. The sentence must reflect not only your actions against Marcus Reed, but also the pervasive fear you instilled within an entire community. He lifted the sentencing order. On the federal counts, this court sentences you to 35 years in federal prison. On the related state convictions and the assault upon a judicial officer, to be served consecutively under the agreement of jurisdiction, you are sentenced to an additional 25 years. Your total sentence is 60 years. A collective sound swept through the gallery, not one of celebration or applause, but of profound release. Harlan gripped the edge of the table. 60 years. Judge Langford looked down at him. Yes, you will die in there. That is a direct consequence of your choices. The gavel fell. The U.S. Marshals moved in. For a fleeting moment, Harlan appeared on the verge of resistance. His shoulders tensed, his breathing quickened. But then he surveyed the room and saw no allies. Captain Thorpe had already entered a plea and was awaiting his sentence. Deputy Chief Vossler had resigned under investigation. The Union had publicly rescinded its support. Thomas Greer was conspicuously absent. The established bulwark had crumbled, and behind it stood only the individuals he had wronged. As the marshals led him to his feet, Harlan glanced one last time toward Maya Williams. She offered no smile, no appearance of triumph. She simply observed him with the calm composure of a woman who had never required retribution to comprehend justice. He was escorted through the side door in chains. When the door closed behind him, the sound was definitive. Months later, Marcus Reed returned to college. He still moved with a degree of caution on some mornings, still checked his mirrors more frequently than he once did. However, he graduated in the spring, walking across the stage as his mother stood in the crowd, both hands pressed to her heart. Following the ceremony, he presented his diploma to her first. His old watch, the one damaged on the night of the traffic stop, had been repaired. A small crack remained near the edge of the face, too deep to be polished away. Marcus intentionally kept it that way, a reminder that time does not erase damage, but it can propel you forward nonetheless. Judge Maya Williams also returned to her courtroom. The bench had been repaired, the microphone replaced, and the floor meticulously polished. A new robe hung in her chambers, though the torn one remained sealed as evidence pending the conclusion of appeals. She did not require its physical presence to recall the events. One morning, before calling her first case, Maya stood alone behind the bench and looked toward the camera positioned above the gallery. It was quiescent now, merely another piece of courthouse equipment, but it had once captured the precise moment when a concealed truth became undeniable. The clerk entered. "Ready, Your Honor?" Maya took her seat. "Yes," she replied. "Let's begin." The courtroom doors opened once more, signifying not a place where violence had triumphed, but a sanctuary where the law, though bruised, remained unbroken
and had resolutely stood its ground. The central lesson of this narrative is that genuine authority does not stem from fear, aggression, or a badge of office. It arises from truth, courage, and accountability. Vance Harlan harbored the delusion that he could operate with impunity behind a shield of authority, silencing those he had victimized. Yet, every act of cruelty ultimately finds its way into the light. Judge Maya Williams demonstrated that justice need not be loud to be potent. At times, it stands quietly, endures the tempest, and allows truth to achieve what anger never could.
Ultimately, this story serves as a reminder that no individual is beyond the reach of the law, and even when justice is delayed, its arrival can possess an unyielding force. Thank you for accompanying me through this narrative to its conclusion. If it resonated with you emotionally, I would be deeply grateful to receive your feedback regarding the storytelling, the emotional cadence, or any particular aspect that stayed with you. Every comment shared contributes to crafting future narratives that are more authentic, affecting, and meaningful. Furthermore, if you possess a powerful or significant personal story, please do not hesitate to submit it to the channel. It may become the next narrative to inspire and touch thousands of others. This presentation is a fictional work, created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and circumstances depicted are imaginary and do not correspond to any actual individuals or true occurrences. The content is intended for the purpose of storytelling and emotional illustration.
In the end, the true solace comes out.